NCURA young professionals. I wish I could see you all, but that's okay. I'm still feeling your energy through the screen. I am so delighted to be with you all today. Again, my name is Ebony Phillips, and I am the training specialist for UMD's Office of Research Administration. And I'm delighted to have the chance to speak with you all today about a topic that is essential for anyone looking to advance in their careers. When Megan contacted me a few weeks ago to do this presentation, I jumped on the chance because I want to give to you all something that I wish I had learned early in my career, which is how to build effective presentations. And so today we're going to talk about that. We are going to talk about preparing. Essentially what it is we're talking about preparing to public speak. Next slide, please. Okay. So I know you all can't speak back to me, so I have rhetorical questions for you. And so how many of you have ever sat through an hour or so long presentation, listening to a presenter blab on, and then you get to the end of the presentation and you realize you have no idea what the point of the presentation was, right? I know I have been there. I was probably the one who did it early in my career. But what were your feelings when you left the room? Were you disappointed that you had given somebody so much of your time only to walk out and feel like you wasted it? Or were you confused because you're not sure what the actual message was? So my job by the end of this presentation is to help you all not be presentation drabbers, which is not really a word. It's just something that I made up. But I don't want you to be it. I want you to be presentation snobs. I want you to walk into a room where you're going to present with full confidence, knowing that you've put together a stellar presentation. Next slide, please. So a few years back, I came across this statistics from Forbes magazine, and it stated that 70% of employed Americans who give presentations agreed that presentation skills are critical for success at work. And so what these professionals understood is that knowing how to create an effective presentation opens doors. Expressing yourself well will set you apart from the crowd, which is what you want as you advance through your careers. So taking a really unique approach, I am going to help you come up with a simple way to create wonderful and effective presentations so that you can stand out from the crowd. And I'm going to illustrate these best practices for creating these presentations using what is called the ADDIE model. All right, next slide, please. So our objectives for today are to introduce you to the ADDIE model. Now, the ADDIE model is actually an instructional design tool that we use in learning and development to create materials or to create training programs. And so we're going to talk about how can you use that. So we're going to discuss using the ADDIE model for constructing presentations. There are 5 elements to the ADDIE model, and 3 of those elements are really good for helping to build presentations. And so we're going to look at that. We're going to examine the big picture. So we're going to discuss developing the message you want to convey, along with conducting an analysis of the audience. You're going to hear me talk about that analysis so much I might drive you crazy, but it is really important. And the event where you're going to be presenting, if you're presenting at an event. Every good presentation should go through a design phase. And in that design phase are where the items like your main idea, your presentation style are determined. And I call this the blueprint. So we're going to look at how do I build this blueprint? And then lastly, after developing a blueprint, the next step would be to assemble the product or assemble the presentation. And so I'll show you how to use this using the development stage of the ADDIE model. All right, next slide, please. So the ADDIE model is an instructional design tool used to build effective training and performance support tools. As you can see here, there are five elements to the ADDIE model. We're going to talk about the first three. So the analysis, the design, and the development. Those are the three elements that we're going to use to build a presentation. Now, typically when I do this particular presentation, it's in two parts. So hopefully I'll do part two in the near future. And in that second part, I talk about delivery because it's great. You're off to a great start with developing it, but you also have to deliver it. And so the last two phases of the ADDIE model, the implementation and the evaluation, is what's used to help you to deliver an effective presentation. So today we're going to discuss part one, which consists of creating a presentation, and hopefully in the near future, part two, where we will talk about then delivering that wonderful presentation you put together. Next slide, please. So getting started is probably the most difficult part of the entire presentation building process. So much so that I find people put off putting their presentation together until the very last minute. So maybe a day or two before the presentation, they're like, all right, I got this coming up, let me get on it. But I beg of you, after today's presentation, please don't put it off so long. Get on. Once you know that you're going to be doing a presentation, get on it right away, unless you just really don't have enough leeway time, right? So you're asked to do it, and it's in a few days you have to do it. But if you know well in advance, get started on it right away, because there is a lot that goes into it. What I find is one of the major reasons why people don't get on it right away is because they just don't have a plan. How do I get started? I can talk about this many things, right? And so what do I choose? Especially if a topic is broad and you weren't really given a specific thing to talk about. So using the ADDIE model, I'll show you how you can avoid the anxiety that rises up around needing to create a presentation. So the first phase we're going to discuss is the analysis phase. For those in the training and development world who are familiar with the ADDIE model, this is where we identify the learning problems. We set our goals and we assess the learning environment. Doing so allows us to see the big picture. Now, looking at this phase from the context of creating an effective presentation, you use the analysis phase to identify your message, define your audience, and also to learn about the environment. So some of the questions you'll be asking yourself in this phase are, what is the message I want to convey? Who is the target audience? And what are the circumstances around the presentation? So we'll look at each one of these individually. Next slide, please. So to avoid losing your audience or having them walk away from your presentation feeling lost or like their time was wasted, make sure to get clear on the message that you want to convey. You want to take weeks, not days, unless days are all you're given, but take weeks to think about this, to develop your message. Once you determine your message, write it out in a sentence, and then focus all of your ideas around what you wrote. So when I became clear on this presentation, I wrote it out, how to build effective presentations simply. And then I began to focus all my efforts, all of my thoughts, all of my research around that particular message. Another thing you want to think about will be your audience, right? And this is important because you don't want to cause an uproar in your audience. So what do you mean by that, Ebony? So let's say today, let's take this as an example. You're coming here, you signed up to come hear about how to build presentations. And then I get on camera and I start talking to you about my days in finance, or I would use an appraisal, to determine the value of somebody's home. so that I can, get them approved for a loan, right? If I started talking to you about that stuff and sharing with you how you can do that, you'd be lost and confused. And what is this lady talking about? This is not what I signed up for. And so that's why you want to get clear on who your audience is. So the point I'm trying to make is really keep at all times at the top of mind who your audience is. Now, speaking of the audience, next slide, please. Know your audience. Please get to know your audience. Proper audience analysis is something that is helpful. Sorry, for when you're building a presentation. Now, I have known of people when they are going to do a presentation, they have like a audience analysis sheet that they'll send out to the coordinator of that venue asking questions about the audience. It might seem like an overkill, but there is some importance to doing that. So when I'm asked to deliver trainings, I really start to do my research about who is going to be in the audience. Who am I talking to? What is it that they're going to want to hear? Because I don't want them feeling like I'm wasting my time. So another thing too that it's really good to know with regard to your audience is their level of expertise. So most of the time when you deliver a presentation, you're going to be delivering a presentation to adults. And it is important to remember that adults come to your presentations with experience. And so we want to honor the experience. We want to honor the knowledge of the adults in the room. So you never want to dumb down your presentation ever for anyone. Now, let's say you know that there's a mixed level of experience in the room about the topics. Well, there's a formula that you can use for that. So one of the things that you would do when it comes to the introduction and the conclusion, this will make more sense a little bit later. Introduction and conclusion, you talk in more layman's terms or general terms toward the people in the audience who really don't know what it is that you're talking about. They're not that familiar with your presentation. The body or the meat of the presentation, you then build that out as if you're talking to your experts. So there you can use a little bit more technical terminology in that piece. Okay. So next slide, please. So here's a really good tool that I found to help me with the audience analysis, and it's called audience, right? The acronym is audience. And there are questions in here that will help me to remember what to think about or what to ask with regard to my audience. So the analysis, who is your audience and how many will be attending your presentation? Really good to know. Understanding what their level of knowledge is on the subject on which you speak. Important to know, because that will determine how you're going to build out that presentation, or you're just going to talk to a mixed audience. The demographics, where are they from? What are their age, sex, and educational backgrounds? Still good to know. Might seem like, what does it matter? But it really does. Let's just say that you're speaking to a younger crowd. All right, if you're speaking to a younger crowd, then you want to bump up the energy and bump up the speed in which you deliver the presentation. If you're talking to a more mature crowd, then you want to do the opposite, and you want to balance your energy and then slow down what it is that you're and how you're delivering the information. The interest. Why are they there? Who sent them? That is really good to know. In part 2, I have a funny way of talking about the 4 different types of people that you will find in your audience. But imagine that you have to deliver to an audience that was required to be there. I have been there so many times. They do not want to sit and hear anything I say. And so I have to bring a different energy and a different expectation when I'm in that type of environment. Speaking of environment, where will you stand? Will everyone be able to hear and see you? Quick story on that. One time I was training, sent by my job to North Carolina to do a training. I didn't ask this question. I figured, the training rooms are going to be like all the training rooms I've been in, only to get there and realize they put me in this little bitty room. It was 15 plus people. I'm sitting, the where I have to stand to present is maybe 2 feet from the first row. And the whole time I'm like this. Now, I used to do what are called marathon trainings. That's what I call them. So that was, that particular one was 5 days for 8 hours. So imagine how uncomfortable that situation was. Customize our needs. So what are the needs with respect to the speech? What do your audience need to get from you? What does whoever asks you to present, what do they need for you to relay to the audience? Customize, do you need to customize it? For example, I could take this particular presentation, which is pretty general and broad, but maybe I go into the airline industry, someone asks me there, and then I have to tailor this message to fit that particular audience. And then the expectations, what do they expect to learn from you? And I'm going to reiterate that you will be talking to adults the majority of the time, and adults want something, right? They have expectations and are looking to you to meet those expectations. All right, next slide, please. Okay. So the quality of your presentation is most directly related to the quality of your preparation. So it is important to know the details surrounding the event so you can prepare. There are a list of questions you can ask. We went through some using that audience acronym, but there are also additional questions that I want to highlight. Some we've talked about, but I want to highlight because they are important for you to give a quality presentation. Next slide, please. So give me them details, right? Give me the details, please. So some of the things you want to know about the room, and I just gave you an example on me not asking about the room, but what's the layout? What's the chair and table arrangement? The door, the window locations, the lighting, is there temperature control? Seems like an overkill, but these things are so very important when you are giving presentations. A lot of times, if I have access to where I'm going to present, I will go and look at the layout, especially if you're going to have some type of activity along with your presentation. You want to know that the room, you probably experienced going into a presentation and it being so cold or so hot in the room. And so that makes it uncomfortable for your guests. So you want to make sure that you have control to the temperature, or at least be able to tell the room, hey, if I could control it, I really would for you. Food arrangements, where they'll be eating or drinking during your presentation. So very important. Many of you probably had lunch before this presentation. That's good for me to know because I have to bump up the energy, right? So anytime you are presenting after lunch, that can be a tough time because people get what I call the itis, right? Start to get sleepy. And so they'll come into the room sleepy and down. And so I have to do more work to bring up that room. Also, you want to know, are you delivering during a meal? Can you imagine how tough it is to deliver during, especially if that food is good? Because let me tell you, if the food is good, you are going to lose out over the food. People are not listening, right? So you need to know that so that you can bring an engaging presentation or deliver an engaging deep presentation during that time. Not only that, for you, if people are eating, then you might hear clanking and banging and talking. And so you have to get yourself in the right mind to be able to push past those distractions you're hearing and give a presentation. Audio visual. Ebony made that mistake too. So I was sent one year at San Antonio, Texas, to open up an office. And so I took all my time, crafted a wonderful presentation. I was doing another marathon session. So I was going to be there. It was 8 business days, 8-hour training days. And so crafted a wonderful presentation, get to San Antonio, Texas, get into the training room, beautiful training room. 40 or so people are looking at me and there's no audio visual around. I never told anybody. Audio visual. So IT is running around trying to get me monitors and computers and screens and all these things that I needed that could have been there. So now I'm sitting with 40 plus people staring at me trying to figure out what we gonna do, right? So not a great way to start off a relationship with one another, but I learned my lesson on that. And are there other speakers? So very important to know. Will there be other speakers before or after me? One of the things that we'll talk about a little bit later when we go into time, you do not want to run into another person's time, right? So when there are multiple speakers, if you go over your time, then you leave it for the person behind you to have to adjust their time. If they're novice presenters, that is a very stressful position to be in. I've been doing this about 16 or so years, so I've learned ways to be able to work around that. But it is rude and uncomfortable for those that are involved. You also want to know if other speakers have addressed your topic, right? So are people hearing this topic again? And if so, because there's no way around it, this is the topic that they want you to do, then you might have to think of, okay, so what are some other clever ways that I'll be able to deliver this and not just do the status quo as before. And what has the audience responded most positively to you? You want to know that if you can. That's a harder one to get information for, but if you can, you want to know that because you don't want to talk about something that just does not motivate your audience at all. Next slide, please. So the next phase of the ADDIE model is the design phase, which can also be seen as the blueprint. So for learning and development professionals, it is where things like the learning objectives or the purpose is being discovered, the content. So what are the main ideas and supporting points that we want? And then also making a media selection. When I think about the blueprint in regard to building a presentation, you want to make sure that you are logical and orderly with identifying your main idea and developing the content of the materials. So you want to start this process of weeks, and not days, unless days are all you're given before the presentation, because this part really can take some time. Also, being prepared well in advance helps to lower the anxiety that can creep up as we get closer to you needing to deliver the presentation. So topics to address when creating the blueprint are determining the main idea, identifying a presentation style, and then appealing to a diverse audience. Next slide, please. Okay, so the main idea, so when the information in a presentation flows, the audience will be more likely to pay attention. And that's because when information is organized well, it's easier for your audience to remember. So just like writing a term paper, we're going to go back to those school days, right? We had to write those term papers. I couldn't stand writing term papers. We had to write those papers, and our teachers would be on us about, the main idea, pick a main idea, the main topic, blah, 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 right? But it is important. And when you're building a presentation, you want to think about it. What is it that you want your audience to walk away knowing? And then once you decide on that main idea, then start thinking about smaller pieces of that idea that's going to be your supporting details. So these should reinforce, those supporting details should reinforce your main idea. And you want to include at least 2 or 3 points because just focusing on a few points will allow you to give equal treatment across the board, right? And it's easier too for your audience to remember. If you give them too many points, it can be overwhelming and confusing. So this slide, illustrates what I identified as my topic for the presentation, the main idea I wanted you all to walk away knowing, and the supporting details or the main points. So when we look at it, you'll see in the hand part, the topic, so build effective presentations. And then my thumb is, okay, what's my main idea? Well, I'm going to use the ADDIE model, right? Some phases or 3 phases you see here of the ADDIE model to help structure a presentation. And then 3 supporting points or supporting details. So ADDIE can assist with content development. ADDIE will help decrease anxiety around presentation delivery. And ADDIE can help to keep the details in mind via an analysis. So those were the most important things that I wanted to make sure that this presentation had. As you begin to further flesh out your material, you will find that you'll use supporting materials. So supporting materials could be examples, statistics, testimonies, stories, right? Something to back your claims you're making in your presentation. Not only does this add credibility to your presentation, but it adds credibility to you as the presenter. Now, rule of thumb, when you are looking to get content for your presentations, for every 1 hour of a presentation, it takes 4 to 6 hours of research. Okay? So that should be the rule of thumb, right? 4 to 6 hours of research. Now, 4 to 6 hours, that's a lot, and you're going to get a lot of information. But then you begin to narrow down that information, keeping in mind what you have decided to focus on. I mentioned stories, and I'm going to come back to stories. Stories are really good to add into your presentations, right? They're a great tool for helping the audience to connect with the material. And when you use stories in your presentations, your audience is more likely to remember the content. Now, if you're not a storyteller, that's fine. I'm not a storyteller. You can do little vignettes, I call them, little pieces of a story that would help illustrate to the audience what it is that you're trying to say. In this world of TED Talk, and I love TED Talk, you notice that a lot of times when people do TED Talks, they open with stories, right? Or and the stories, if you really pay attention, will evoke emotion, right? Or provide information that is going to be presented within the presentation. So next slide, please. So you have your main idea. So now let's think about what type of presentation that you're going to do. It's just like there's different diverse styles in people, there are diverse styles of presentation. Next slide, please. So your presentation styles that you can do, there are 5. So there's informative, demonstration, persuasive, ceremonial, and impromptu. So I'll talk about each one of these. So your informative, you would do this type of presentation if you're teaching something. So kind of like what I'm doing now, I'm talking about how to build effective presentations. So I'm teaching some information that is useful and valuable. You have demonstration. So demonstration is if you were to show something. So you can think of a cooking show, or you can think of a manager, demonstrating to new leaders how to manage virtual schedules of their employees. You have persuasive. And in persuasive, you're trying to influence someone to do something. So think about lawyers in a courtroom, right? So when they get to their closing arguments, the way that they deliver that argument is in a persuasive manner. They're delivering a persuasive presentation because they want to get the jury on their side. You have ceremonial. This is when you're paying tribute to someone or you're celebrating someone. This is a type of presentation I had to do yesterday. And then you have the last, which is an impromptu or extemporaneous. That's a mouthful. Extemporaneous presentation. Now, this is what you may find yourself doing a lot of the time. So this is when you're in situations like maybe you're in class or maybe you're at work, or maybe you're in social setting and you need to say something. Someone eggs you on to say a thing, right? Or you felt led to stand up and say a thing. That would be an impromptu. So an example of that I will share with you all was my cousin's wedding. So she and I were really close, and so she was getting married. This was years ago, and when it came to the time to do the toast and things, my family was egging me on. Hey, Ebony, why don't you say something? You two are close, blah, 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 blah. Oh, okay. I didn't really think about it much. So I stood up and did my thing. Now, let me give you a little backstory. The gentleman who she was marrying, it took 10 years for them to get to the altar, which is fine. But along the way, he was displaying behaviors like he never wanted to marry. So I was the one, over the years, wiping her tears and helping to mend her heart, right, as he was breaking it slowly. So Anthony mentioned that, right, in my speech, and how I liked him initially. Right? I said initially, but then he moved over to a place where I, really got to see what a stand-up guy he was. But the damage was done in front of his family and mine, and I almost got barred from the family, and I had to go around apologizing to everyone. But look, here is, what I believe was on my side is I was about 7 months pregnant. So I don't know something about the hormones. When you're pregnant, you just won't tell the truth. But was I just Evan? So anyway, be careful when you're doing those impromptu uh, those impromptu uh, presentations. I don't do them anymore. I got myself into too much trouble. So I'm going to stop right here. And because it feels like I'm just a talking head to the screen, and I want to open up for the chance for questions to be asked of anything that you've heard about so far. And so I'll give a few minutes for that. No pressure to do it, but if you want to, and then we'll move on.
Thank you so much, Ebony. We actually did have a question come in. If you could go into a little bit of further detail about the difference between informative and demonstrative presentations, since there is a little bit of overlap there.
Yeah, so informative, it's telling why information is useful and valuable. So I'm informing you about something. We're demonstrating. I am showing you how to do it. So those two can very well go together, just depending on the presentation you're putting together. So a lot of times when I'm doing more workshop or training sessions, I'm doing both. So I'm telling you why the information is useful. So for an example, if this were live, we would get to a point where I will then demonstrate some of the things that I'm talking about through an activity. So one is first telling, and then the demonstration, we're going to actually do the thing that I'm talking about. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you so much. As a second question, do you have a general sense of what supporting details you find have been most useful or effective when you've been giving presentations?
It depends. And I know that, right? But in this world of research, I've heard that it depends is a normal response, but it really depends. It depends on the type of presentation you're doing. So for an example, let's say I was doing a presentation that was more technical in nature. Well, then I might be giving you statistics and things, or let's even say type of presentation. Let's say I'm doing a persuasive presentation. Then in that type of presentation, I might want to give you more statistical facts, that I found that would help to back up the claims that I'm making. The claims that I want you to buy into. If I am doing more of a good nature, let's say communication, I'm doing a presentation on communication, I might want to do more storytelling, or I might want to give examples of when communication went bad and talk about what could have been done differently. So it really does depend on the topic and the type of presentation you want to do.
Wonderful, thank you. Our next question was, could you clarify a little bit, would the main idea be equivalent to a presentation's objectives? And do you have a general sense for the recommended number of main ideas and supporting details?
Absolutely. So with the main idea and supporting details, I'll go there first. So the main idea is supporting details, no more than 3. That's good enough. And that's if you have like an hour or so long presentation. You don't want to give too many because then that overloads your audience. So here's the thing about people, and as presenters, we have to, if you want to get really good and comfortable at presenting, understand that people naturally check out after 20 minutes. It has nothing to do with you unless you're just boring and giving something that they don't want to hear. But about 20 minutes, they check out. And so there are things that you can do, which I usually talk about in part 2, to help bring people back or keep them engaged. So if you think about, I only have 20 minutes, people are going to be, flowing in and out of your presentation mentally. And so you don't want to give them too much. Megan, can you tell me the first part of that question again? I'm sorry.
Would the main idea of a presentation be somewhat similar to the objectives, or what is the relationship between the objectives and the main idea?
Yeah, somewhat so. So your main idea is what you want the person to walk away with. Your objectives are how you're going to do that. Makes sense. So my main idea today was to show you all how to build effective presentations simply. That was my main idea. That's what I wanted you to walk away with. When I did the objectives, I talked about how I was going to make that happen. And so I'm going to introduce you to the ADDIE model. We're going to discuss the ADDIE model. We're going to talk about 3 aspects of the ADDIE model. Those become my objectives.
Thank you so much. We have one more question for this point in the presentation.
Okay.
Do you have any tips for delivering impromptu presentations, especially things like elevator pitches that are particularly short? It's sometimes difficult to determine what information to say or choose which information is most important when you're on the spot.
Ooh, okay, I told you about my story about on the spot. I'm probably the wrong person to ask about on the spot. But one of the things that it did teach me, right? Because everything is a lesson. And so what it did, it taught me was, Ebony, look at the crowd, right? Take time to look at the crowd. And this can take seconds. What I'm gonna say sounds like, oh my gosh, it takes minutes. They just need us to get up and speak. But this really could take seconds if you're really in tune to where you are, your environment. So take a look at a crowd. Who's in the crowd? What would this crowd benefit from knowing if I were to say something? Okay. How much time, is allowed for me to say something? So for like this wedding, sometimes people can go on and on when it comes to toast, but maybe you're in a meeting, a board meeting or something, and they say, we give you 2 minutes or 3 minutes a person to say anything. Okay, so how many points can I get in 2 minutes, right? So it is stopping and really to think about and take assessment. And that goes back to knowing the audience, thinking about that audience acronym.
Thank you so much. And if anyone has further questions, again, you're able to input those into the question and answer panel over on the bottom right of your screen. But Ebony, we'll hand it back to you for continuing our presentation.
All right, can you go to the next slide, please? All right, so just as our presentation style are diverse, so is our audience, right? And so you'll have different people in your audience with regard to levels of experience, but also in the way that they learn. And so when you're building presentations as best as you can, You want to be mindful of the learners that are in your audience. So the rule of thumb, just accept that all of these types of learners are in your audience. And so the types of learners, there's three types. So you have your visual learner. So your visual learner, they need to see and read things in order to process the information. And so PowerPoints are great for your visual learner. And if you're doing more of a training or workshop type thing, then maybe case studies would help, something that they can read and look at and absorb. You have your auditory learners. And so your auditory learners learn by hearing. And so how you can benefit your auditory learners is changing the tones and things in your presentation, which I typically talk about in part 2 with delivering presentations. And then you have your kinesthetic learner. And so your kinesthetic learner is the person that needs to do what you're talking about. They don't get it until they're doing it. With the kinesthetic learner, unfortunately, many times when you're given a presentation, it's harder to engage that particular learner because it's not the time to do the thing. I can just tell you about the thing. And so what I've learned when we were in person, with COVID, most things that has changed now, and our environments are more virtual. But when I was in person, what I would do is I would use pipe cleaners for my kinesthetic learners. And when they would come into the room, I would just have those pipe cleaners out on the table. I never said anything because I like to see, okay, who is the kinesthetic learner, right? Who are they in the audience? And so they're the ones that typically they just start grabbing them. and what they do is they will start creating stuff. Right? So I had all kind of little neat knickknacks and stuff made for me because they need to be doing something. And this even goes to when you're giving presentations, and sometimes people are on their cell phones. Now, some people they're just being kind of rude. Others, if they're a kinesthetic learner, they have to do something with their hands to help them take in the information. So we can't always assume because somebody is on a device during a presentation that they're not paying attention. Some are, and it's in the doing of something that helps them to absorb the information. So be mindful of the learners that you have in your audience. Now, you can't always cater to each one, especially when it comes to the kinesthetic learner, but do the best that you can to engage all of the different learners in the audience. But rule of thumb, most important, is just keep in mind choose the technique, that best suits the content of your material. Next slide, please. Okay. So the third and the last phase of the adding model, which we'll explore with regard to building effective presentations, is the development phase. So in the training world, this is the phase where the instructional designers assemble the product, right? So in other words, we bring that blueprint to life. When you look at it from the standpoint of delivering the presentation, you are going to be doing things like structuring the presentation for delivery, developing a script for your presentation, and then acquiring an awareness of time. Next slide, please. So I really like this Dilbert cartoon strip. I felt it was a great way to open up the discussion about organizing the delivery of your presentation. I'll give you a few minutes to look it over. All right, so how many of you, rhetorical, because I can't hear you, but rhetorical. How many of you have wanted to ask this question of your presenter? Right? You're giving them all this time and you walk away like, what was that? Now, I've probably been both sides of it. Probably been the one that delivered something and people walked away like, what was it? Right? And then I've sat in some where I was like, okay, what was going on here? So when presentations are poorly organized, the impact of the message is reduced and the audience is less likely to accept the presenter's ideas. That's very important to understand, because if you are giving a presentation where you have to persuade, where you need an audience to buy into something that you want to change, right? Or you want to implement, and you know that thing is going to benefit them, then be very intentional about how you put together your presentation. Next slide, please. Okay. So we're going to look at that structuring. So structuring your presentation helps to deliver an organized message. So the structure should include an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. So we're going back to hearing our teachers tell us about those term papers. Where's your intro? Where's your body? And where's the conclusion? And so it's the same for a presentation. Now, when you're thinking about the introduction consists of 3 parts. The 3 parts of the introduction are an opening grabber, the agenda, and the purpose of the presentation. So an opening grabber, the agenda, and the purpose of the presentation. So the opening grabber can be a shocking statistic, it can be a quote, it can be a funny story, just something that is going to draw your audience into your presentation. And so for this presentation, I opened with the quote from Forbes: about 70% of employed Americans believe having presentation skills is important. The agenda or the objectives, some people call them agendas, some call them objectives, however way is fine, right? So that highlights the points that you plan on covering with the audience. And then the purpose or the main message of your presentation should focus on the benefit to the learners, or I'm sorry, the benefit to your listeners. So going back to remembering that in your audience are adults the majority of the time. Adults are busy, adults have their own experience and knowledge, even if it's a little bit, they know something. So when people are sitting in the audience, they want to know the WIFM, and that's what's in it for me. And so right up front, you want to let the audience know what the WIFM is, what is in it for them if they sit here for umpteen minutes or hours and listen to my presentation. So for this presentation, I expose that I will show you the ADDIE model, right? A tool that you can use to build effective presentations. So the body, let's talk about the body. So the body is the meat of your presentation. So this is where your main ideas and where you're going to discuss your points, and you're going to support those points. So best practice is to prioritize your main ideas and deliver them in a logical order. So I introduced, in this presentation, I introduced the main ideas when I started discussing each of the 3 phases of the ADDIE model. The supporting details were captured on the slides that followed the main idea, right? So best practice, 2 to 3 main ideas in a presentation is plenty, as you don't want to lose your audience. And then you have your conclusion. So when it comes to your conclusion, there are parts to the conclusion. It's not just, okay, thank you, all, bye, right? You want to be intentional about your conclusion. So your conclusion should summarize your main points. Your conclusion should have a closing grabber, which consists of closing remarks. And the goal is to leave the audience with at least one memorable thought, right? From all of the information that you gave. And then you want to have a time for questions and answers if that is applicable. Now, you can have creative ways how you do your conclusion, but you want to make sure those elements are somehow part of the conclusion. Okay, next slide. So PowerPoint. So people choose to use PowerPoints during their presentations to add a visual interest. And this does help for our visual learners to have that PowerPoint to help them absorb and to remember the material. And studies show that when you have a PowerPoint, when you use a PowerPoint and you have vivid pictures in your PowerPoint, people are apt to remember 95% of the information that was presented. So there is a important place for PowerPoint. But if you're going to use PowerPoint, be mindful of some best practices for PowerPoint. So the first, KISS, keep it super simple. So when you are building your PowerPoint, make it as straightforward as possible and the slides as simple and clean as possible. Some of the things you want to avoid are the flying letters and numbers and the spinning objects and the turning and the flipping, right? Because believe it or not, that's distracting to your audience. Now, let's say, though, you have a presentation that's whimsical in nature, right? Because you're going to do all types of presentations. Then it's okay to have some of that, but you just want to minimize the number of times things are flying and spinning across your screen. 6 lines of text or less is a good formula to follow with regard to building your PowerPoints. When you have too much information on the screen, especially for your visual learners, then it becomes crowded and it can get confusing. And so you've probably experienced presentations where a person just put everything on their slides, their whole presentation. And your thought was probably, I just could have got a copy of the slide and just read it, and I would have learned everything that I needed to learn. All right. And so that is a mistake that people make. I have been there. I have done that to try to remember material, but it is not a good practice. 6 lines or less. Large font, sorry. So when you are choosing your font size, also be mindful about the font size that you choose. So 24 point or higher is a good rule of thumb with regard to the size. Now, I don't quite know how to explain this. I'll do the best I can. One of the things that I've learned too in delivering presentations is not everyone's equipment is the same. So I can go to one venue and I can use like a 24 point and they put it up on their screen and it looks tiny. And so I need to go in and adjust. There's been other times where I might have used a 24, 25 point, and I go into a place and it's huge on the screen, right? And so those are things that you might have to be mindful of as you are building out. But for the rule of thumb is 24 point or above. Use images. I shared earlier that when you use images, people remember 95% of what they hear and see. It helps them to retain the information. Use a white or light background with dark letters. This makes it easier for the audience to read the information. So no rainbow colored backgrounds because you think it's cool, right? Your guests will find it distracting. So if we were in person, I would ask you which of my slides violated that, right? And it was the slide with the flag, right? I did not follow rule of thumb, and I did that intentionally so you can see how distracting that can be when you have when you make the PowerPoint slide not easy to read. No talking to the screen. This one can get a little tricky because sometimes when you're delivering a presentation, you really do need to look at your PowerPoint. Maybe you're doing a graph and you're talking about a graph, and you need to look at that graph so that you can talk about the information that's on the graph. Well, one of the things that I've learned to do is to step into the audience. So maybe the first or second row, I will step back into that row so that my back is not to the audience. As I am talking to it, I am with them viewing it from their perspective. And that really helps because you don't want your back to the audience. And then system failure, just be prepared. I've been doing this so long that there is typically something that will go a little bit awry with the equipment. And so not to get frazzled, just know, okay, this is a part of the plan. What is plan B, C, or D? I'll share a quick story. My very first interview for a training position umpteen years ago, I was so nervous. Oh my gosh, knees shaking, sweating. I was a mess. And so part of the interview was I had to deliver a 20-minute presentation. So I crafted this presentation, get to the interview, give them my little thumb drive because we didn't have the Google Docs and share and all that kind of stuff back then, and it wouldn't work. They swapped out computers, wouldn't work. Swapped out monitors, wouldn't work. But luckily, when I put my presentation together, something just told me print it out as well. So I printed out a number of the PowerPoint, and luckily I had the exact number for the people in the room. And so I want to believe that that is what helps me to get that job, right? So be prepared at all times. Next. So the script. The script, right? So why do I need to write a script? It is so important when you're putting together a presentation to get your thoughts down on paper. A lot of times a person will think, I built the presentation, I know what I put in the presentation, and I'm just gonna wing it. And they go out and they speak. And it might not go over well. Now I'm gonna say might, because you have some people who are excellent at speaking on the fly. They don't need to write anything down. We're all different in how we go about building and delivering our presentations. But for the majority of us, I would say that's not the case. We need something written to help us stay on track along the way. Not only that, when you do not write down your thoughts, what can happen is, let's say you did this presentation, it was amazing, it was wonderful, and someone saw it and say, hey, I want you to come over to X, Y, and Z and do that presentation again. You didn't write anything down because you were off the fly, and then you go over there and you try to recreate it and you don't say the things exactly the same, right? And so really think about and consider writing a script. So I talked about people having the mindset of, hey, I put it together, I know what's in it, I'm just gonna wing it. And that is far from the truth, right? You want to see your presentation and your scripts as two separate entities. So yes, you build your presentation, but now let's go and look at the script. So there is an organization called SOAP, state-of-the-art presentations. And they say that even if a person just puts 70% of effort or time into building a script, then it would make for a better delivered presentation. So taking the time to write a script is so worth it, right? And it also helps you to come across more natural, and it also helps you to ad lib. So as you ad lib and you go to the, all the way over here to the left, you can come back to your notes and center yourself. So let's look at some best practices when it comes to writing a script. Next slide, please. So when you're writing your script, you want to write the way you speak. Now, with our term papers, we could do that, right? If we wrote the way we speak, our teachers would give us back that term paper all marked up for our grammar. But when you're building a script for your presentation, write the way you speak. That way, the information comes across more natural to your audience. So when I'm thinking about, when I'm working on my script for my presentations, I visualize my audience and me having a casual conversation with them. And so that helps me to write a presentation that I will deliver in a more casual manner. Now, if it's technical in nature, then it's technical in nature. And so it won't be a script that is casual and everyday speak, so to say. You want to keep your script brief. So when you think about a script, there's no need to write out paragraphs of things. I have to because that's just how my brain works, but most people don't have to. 1 or 2 lines, right, that will help you remember a particular point works. That's perfectly fine. If you use note cards, 1, maybe 2 lines on a note card to help you to remember. You want to add pictures. So a script can literally be pictures, right? Some people think that way. They can mind map, see a picture and start connecting their concepts and are able to deliver the information that way. You want to, once you have your script written, you want to practice it. I jumped ahead of myself. Let me go back to repetition. One of the things you want to do when you are delivering a presentation is you want to repeat information. And so you make sure when you're writing out your script, you're repetitive in some of those things that you say. So Ebony, what is it that I'm repetitive in? It's those points that you want your audience to remember the most. So what is really important? What is something that you want to highlight? That you want them to remember, that's the thing you repeat. Studies show that people need to hear a thing 7 times in order for them to actually hear the thing, right? So saying something 7 times it takes to get someone to actually buy into, I don't even want to say buy into, but to actually hear what you're saying. So build into that your presentation repetitive comments and statements. And then practice, practice, practice. You want to practice your presentation, 1, just so that you can hear it. Because sometimes when we write out our scripts, our presentations for our scripts, we think, because we're doing it in our head, we think that it sounds a certain way. And then once we say it out loud, we realize, wow, that doesn't flow very well. So that practicing helps to catch that before you go deliver your presentation. Also, practicing helps you to cut down on the time if you need to on your script, or increase the time, just depending on how much time you are given to deliver your presentation. So practice, practice, practice. And you'll hear me say that practice thing several times because it really is important to delivering an effective presentation. Next slide, please. So having awareness of time. Surveys found that the #1 annoyance of people polled regarding their thoughts, their thoughts on the mistakes presenters make is going over time. So don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. If anything, strive to be under time. There is nothing wrong with ending a presentation before your fully allotted time. As a matter of fact, because we are all adults, giving a person back time is like giving them a precious gift, right? Especially in this virtual world, we go from meeting to meeting to meeting. Sometimes we don't get a chance to stand up and stretch or go to the restroom or let alone eat something. So if you can give somebody time back in their day, they will absolutely appreciate it. So don't feel um, a negative way about being under time. So your audience is going to have expectations of you when they come to hear you speak. When you're in front of them, there are expectations. And those expectations are centered around time. So let's say you're in the middle, you know you're running out of time, but I have to tell you this one more thing because it's so important. Oh my, you need to know this. Don't do it. Send it by email or even ask permission. Hey, we're probably going to run out of time before I get to say this. For those that need to leave, it's okay for you to leave. For those that want to stay, please stay. But if you do not get permission or if you do not stop, what happens is once you hit time, right? That hour, 10 minutes, whatever it is, once you hit it, your audience checks out. It's done. They're done. And so every second that you go over that time, you're irritating them more and more because now there's this anxiety because they want to get to the next thing. So I'm really a stickler for talking about and pushing that time. And so what will help with you making sure you get down that time is to practice. If you're going to be presenting with other presenters, keep in mind, please don't go over that time because you flow into their time and now they have to cut their presentation. So that practicing and having awareness of time is a really big deal. Another thing that I want to share with regard to time is start on time. So if your presentation is scheduled to start at a specific time, start it. What a lot of times a person will do, and I'm guilty of this too, especially early on in my career, is waiting. So let me wait for a certain number of people to get into the room and then we will begin. Well, what you do is the people that took the effort, that made the effort to get there on time, you're not honoring them and you're not honoring the fact that they got there when you asked them to get there. So start on time. Now, there are times where, especially in this virtual world, where you just know people, especially if it's a good number of people that are having technical difficulties, then I can understand pausing, but you don't want to pause too much. And for those that are there, you might want to, just apologize. Thank them for being there. We apologize. We have quite a few people with some technical difficulties, so I'm just going to hold off a minute or two and get started. So I want to show you a really neat formula with regard to time. Next slide, please. So this formula here, get to know this formula with regard to distribution of time if you are delivering presentations. So I'm going to go with the higher percent here, so the 15%, as I explain this. So let's say you're asked to give a presentation that is 10 minutes long, okay? And so you're trying to figure out, okay, I have 10 minutes, so how am I going to get all the information that I need to get in 10 minutes? What points am I going to make? Am I going to be able to make 1 point or 3 points, right? It just kind of depends. So you'll start looking at this particular formula. So for your introduction, and remember there are 3 parts to that introduction. So your introduction, let's say we're going to give 15%. So that is 1.5 minutes. For your conclusion, 15% is 1.5 minutes. So now this 10-minute presentation has been cut down to 7 minutes for the body of the presentation. So now I have to get that meat of the presentation in 7 minutes. I need to be able to present it effectively to my audience. Let's say you have a question and answer. You decide that, you know what, I'm going to put a Q&A in this presentation. It makes sense for this presentation. And so you decide, okay, I'm going to do 2 minutes for a Q&A. Well, now take that 10 minutes you initially had, back it out to 8 minutes. So now that whole thing is 8 minutes, a minute and a half for the introduction, a minute and a half for the conclusion. Now you only have 5 minutes for the body of your presentation. And so it's really good when you're to know this. And so when you're practicing, to make sure that, okay, I have 5 minutes, or 7 minutes to get all that you need to say in that, the meat in the 5 to 7 minutes. As I was doing my research, I came across this one story that was shared where this young lady was given 10 minutes to give a presentation. She, by the time she ended the presentation, 23 minutes had gone by. But when they asked her, how long do you think you spoke for? She said 7 minutes, right? So, and I understand that, I do, because when you're presenting, time goes by so fast, especially when you're passionate about a thing and you've done all this research and you want people to really understand and buy into and benefit from what it is that you have, the knowledge that you have, you can find yourself going a little bit longer than you intended to. Next slide, please. So to help with practicing with time, here's a guideline that can be used for preparing. So for a 60-minute presentation, SOAP, which is that state-of-the-art presentation, suggests 1 day for a 60-minute presentation. For a 15-minute presentation, you want to practice for 3 days. For a 10-minute presentation, 7 days. And for a 5-minute presentation, 15 days. Now that sounds excessive, but it really is hard to get all that you want to say in 5 minutes. Just recently, I was asked to, excuse me, do a presentation at a conference, and I was given 20 minutes. So I could think about my, and I had an activity. So I had to think about my my introduction, my conclusion, and then this activity. And so I had to practice it, and I kept going over time and kept going over time. I was getting so frustrated. But had I not done that practicing to keep cutting down and keep cutting down and keep cutting down, the day of the event, I would have went way over time. So it is really important to get in that practice. Next slide, please. All right, so we have come to the conclusion of our presentation today, and I'm going to do it a little differently because I want to hear from you or to see from you. Can't hear you, wish I could, but I would like to see what it is that you retained from this information today. Are you going to walk away with things that I hope for you to walk away remembering? So we're going to have some polling questions. We'll have 3 polling questions. I will ask that the first polling question be put on the screen and for you to please answer. So the question is, what is the ADDIE model actually used for? And think about that word actually.
All right, and as we are giving our audience some time to answer that question, we do also have a question for you. Mm-hmm. So one of our audience members wanted to know, PowerPoint allows you to use some themes so that all your slides have the same theme, but maybe different designs. Do you think it's okay to use that theme section that has the same color scheme, but some variation, or is it better to stick to one look for your slides?
So that's a great question. And I'm gonna go with it depends. So sometimes when you're doing a presentation for an organization, they're going to dictate that. They're going to say, please use our theme, our slides, and they will present you with the slides. And you want to stick to that theme. And you can add little pictures here or there, but what I try to do is not do something that's going to take away too much from the theme that they've given me, if that makes sense. So it really just kind of depends on what you're doing and who you're doing it for and what is their ask of you.
Great. And I'm going to share now our responses for that first poll.
Absolutely. So that ADDIE model is actually used for training, for the learning and development field to build training materials and programs. Thank you so much. Next poll question. So what are the 3 phases of the ADDIE model that can be used to help structure effective presentations?
All right, we've got another question for you as we're taking some time to get that poll answered.
Okay.
So do you have some recommendations or advice for adapting these principles for less formal presentations or other situations in your work life in which you have to be talking about something, but it might not be a formal presentation?
Yeah, oh, that's great. So think about the presentation style and go to that impromptu and think along the lines of impromptu. Because all day, every day, when we really think about it, when we're interacting with people, we're presenting, right? We're presenting. We're speaking, we're public speaking. And so we have to stop and think about who we're speaking to, what we're speaking about, and what would benefit the conversation, right? What knowledge do I have that would benefit this particular conversation? And if you stay along those lines, in my opinion, if you stay along those lines of thinking and questioning, then you can use the information that I've given in almost any situation.
Thank you. Now we have our results for our second one.
All right. Absolutely. So analysis, design, and development. And the way that I presented to you all today, those 3 phases are what you would use to guide you for building effective presentations. There are 5 actual parts of it: the implementation and the evaluation. And the implementation and evaluation have more to do with delivering effective presentations. And then the last question, please. So when assembling the blueprint or that development phase, how should you structure the presentation?
All right, and one more question as we're taking this poll. Do you have any thoughts on presenting virtually versus in person, and if there are any adaptations that you make when you're presenting virtually?
Yeah, it is. You know, I'm even trying myself to get used to this virtual environment. One of the things that I have come to realize in the virtual environment is you really have to bring the energy. And you have to figure out ways to keep your audience engaged. So if that's throwing in polling questions here and there, if that is having a quick, simple activity that you can have them do, if it's varying the tones of your presentation, which we learn in delivering presentations, if it's throwing a story in, if it's asking a question of somebody impromptu or to the audience impromptu. Doing those things helps to keep engaged, because what I've learned in this virtual world, and I'm guilty too, not criticizing because I am guilty, we find ourselves doing other things. We're trying to multitask. And so instead of giving all of our attention as we would if we were in person to a presenter, we're, listening to that and doing other things. So for the presenter in this virtual environment, I believe there is more work that we have to do to keep the to keep the audience engaged. So for an example, just this presentation, if we were in person, there would be an activity that I love to do. It's almost like an ad lib activity, and I call it a perfectly bad presentation. It's so funny. And as I was doing this, I was like, oh my, I cannot do this in the virtual world, right? Because it was a way that I would use the activity to bring everything that we learned together. And so instead, I'm like, okay, well, let me do the summary in polling questions, right? So, that's a way I had to adapt. And I hope that answered the question.
Thank you so much. Let's go ahead and share those results for this most recent poll.
Absolutely. It is the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. Think about those term papers and how your teachers would try to drill in your head how to write a good term paper. So thank you so much. Thank you all for engaging me in those polling questions. And I think I have, Megan, if you can go back to the PowerPoint. Is my next slide. Yeah, my thank you slide. So thank you all so much for giving me your time today. I appreciate you. You did not have to carve out an hour and a half of your time listening to me, but I'm so glad you did. And my hope is that you got something, even if it's just one thing you're walking away, that's going to help you present better in life. And remember, all day, every day, we are presenting. We really are. So think about some of those principles that I discussed with relation to who is the audience, who's in it, what knowledge do I have that can benefit them, and how best do I want to deliver it? Do I want to instruct them on it? Do I want to demonstrate it? Do I just want to do an impromptu conversation, right? So those are the things that you can use in every day with everyone that you interact with. So thank you all. I appreciate you giving you some time back in your day.
Thank you so much, Ebony, and thank you to everyone who has attended today's session. On behalf of the National Council of University Research Administrators, we thank you for coming today.